Number 10. Macaroni. The term macaroni took on a whole new meaning in the 1700s. Macaroni was not a delicious lunch, but rather, in this sense, a fashionable and eccentric subculture that emerged in Georgian England. That was my second guess. Love that. Macaronis, plural, so many of them, macaronis were known for their extravagant clothing and, of course, these massive wigs that would make RuPaul herself take a step back. These things were insane. I mean, holy shit, guys. They were the bread and butter of the whole macaroni operation. It's all up top. They thought they were showcasing their cosmopolitan tastes and sophistication by wearing a bug-filled nest. However, the macaroni style was often satirized for how it looked, its exaggerated mannerisms and excessive fashion choices. Definitely easy to make fun of in some sense. And these wigs, by the way, so dirty, impossibly filthy, full of bugs. Hope you like lice. Yankee Doodle went to town a-riding on a pony. That A before riding, he added that. He wasn't good with syllables. A-riding on a pony. I'm on to you, man. Stupid rhyme. It's gonna be stuck in my head all day now. Stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. No. Number 9. Krakows. Also known as polanes, these slip-ons here were a distinctive style of footwear popular in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. Named after the Polish city of Krakow, of course, these shoes were characterized by their elongated, pointed toes. It's quite ridiculous. I can't imagine how many people tripped over these shoes. It's insane. The fashion of wearing Krakows quickly spread throughout Europe, symbolizing social status and wealth, all in the form of that. Okay, sure. We'll buy it, I guess. The exaggerated length of the toes varied, of course, with some reaching extreme lengths that required additional support structures. Yeah, we ruined it immediately. We had to start tying strings to it. That's how big they got. Every guy wanted the longest, thickest shoe, if you know what I mean, and turned into a joke. Concerns over practicality led to their decline by the mid-15th century, but I ask you, bumblebees, should we bring this back? Forget Uggs. Let's pull a Krakow out this fall. What's up? Number 8. Hobble skirts. In the early 20th century, hobble skirts were the talk of the town. Everybody hobbled like a penguin. It was so odd, but they looked great. Gotta admit, they looked so sophisticated. The skirts were introduced around 1910 and they were characterized, of course, by their narrow and constricting design, tightly hugging the legs, restricting movement, and creating a hobbling effect. Seen as a symbol of elegance, of course, hobble skirts embodied the desire for a sleek silhouette and the allure of the fashionable Gibson girl image, right? That image does not come to life. It stays like this all day. You cannot walk. However, their impracticality and potential hazards, such as difficulty in walking and navigating any and all staircase, that eventually led to their decline by the mid-1910s. But I don't know, should we bring these ones back? Imagine being at prom, you're walking around in one of those, you look great. You look great, you don't have to dance with anyone, you're just doing your own thing.
Number 7. Shields green. Ever since humans started wearing fabric, we've wanted and found ways to stylize and color. It's what we do. The Romans, oh how opulent they were, they loved purple. The Egyptians, they loved blue. Folks living in the Victorian era, they loved green. To be specific, a particular shade of green. There was a common color back then called Shields green. It was made in the lab by a spooky, scary Swedish guy, Flinga Forga Borgen. That's what they do in the lab. That's what I was told. I don't know. Or make IKEA furniture. This color was used in everything. Dresses, fabric, paint. As the Valley Girls would say, it's totally in. The trouble is, it was comprised of a compound of copper and arsenic. Therefore, it was toxic and it actually caused a lot of harm. It also had links to cancer. The most famous case was Napoleon Bonaparte. When he was banished to St. Helena, the walls in his house were painted with the shade of Shields green. It might have actually contributed to him passing. He died of stomach cancer, or he passed away of stomach cancer, so it might have contributed. Number 6. Pestilence. This could really be any time in history considering how many viruses have gone around in human history, but this was an issue in Victorian times. Cities were growing larger, especially with the Industrial Revolution firing on all cylinders. It must have been a crazy time to be alive. For the rich, they mostly dodged that, but not always. In the case of laundry, well, wealthy people couldn't be bothered to do their own laundry. I mean, they're wealthy, that's what they do. And sometimes would have them washed and taken by launderers who washed their clothes with the rest of the city. Being that the clothes were washed with the rest of the clothes, or washed by those in poor areas, there was a lot of sickness going around at the time, and well, they're contagious. A lot of times the illnesses would cling to fabrics, and when given back to their customers could very well come down with whatever London was feeling at the time. It doesn't sound like a lot of fun because it wasn't a lot of fun. It's kind of like the silent undoer. Not good. Yeah, gross. So you put on your dress, next thing you know, you're in bed for 3 weeks and you croak. Number 5, beetle dresses. There's been a lot of crazy dresses in history. I mean, Lady Gaga alone would be the whole list at this rate. The meat dress was insane in my opinion. I mean, can you imagine wearing a whole meat dress? How bad that would smell after an hour in the hot California sun? Ooh, no thanks. Plus, not to mention all the other weird and wacky things celebrities have worn. There's just too many to mention. I'd be here all day. Well, what if I told you a dress from the past rivals some of our modern craziness? Hard to believe. There was a trend in the 19th century to sew beetle carapaces right into their dresses. That's the hard stuff on the bugs and the vertebrae and all that gross stuff. Ooh, gross things. Similar to how women of ancient Egypt would crush the colorful bugs up to make a makeup, these were sewn into the dresses to make some sort of weird, freaky, colorful embroidery. And to be fair, it looks good, but I'll pass. What are you wearing tonight? I'm wearing the cockroaches I found in my basement. Oh, yes. Gross. Number 4, crinoline. Crinoline is an underskirt frame made from tough horsehair to form an almost bell-shaped cage that will go underneath the dress in order to give the wearer a much fuller and royal look. You've seen them before, you know, those big cages. You've seen them. Now, besides the fact that you're literally walking around in a cage, which I honestly can't think of a better metaphor for women in the 18th and 19th centuries to break free from, but there's one main issue that I cannot get over. You're going to get in the way of stuff. That's just how it's gonna happen. Trying to get into doorways, carriages, really anything would be difficult when you've got a lot of extra hip there. It's not cool. Also, not to mention, the fabric may get caught in something such as machinery, which, as some stories tell us, may have actually happened and could possibly have been fatal, which that's not a good way to go. There's good ways to go, that's not one of them. Talk to the chief, not it. Number 3, aniline dye. The year was 1856 and life was great, or not so great depending on who you ask. If you ask a rich guy, it was probably good. A poor guy, probably not. There was lots of illnesses to be had and lots of folks had siblings who perished young from being ill. Everyone's got a story like, my sister, right, she never made it, but she never made it, she's not here anymore. Anyway, William Henry Perkin was a man on a mission to cure as many illnesses as he could. Many imperial soldiers were feeling a lot of those illnesses at the time, specifically malaria. He was trying to create an anti-malaria drug using aniline. Well, he did not find a cure for malaria, but he did discover it makes a very lovely dye. So, task failed successfully, I guess. It was a dye that makes deep reds, purples, and even black. Ooh, naturally this picked up a lot of steam. Or paint roller, I guess, because dye, funny color. Ha, good joke. Anyway, and it began to be used in everything from socks to shoe polish. The trouble is, once people got enough exposure to clothing with aniline dye, their skin would go red, itchy, and severely inflamed, and was known for causing really bad headaches. That's because it would absorb through their skin and their bloodstream and poison their blood. That's bad. That's not good. We don't like that here. Sure, there's bad outfits out there, but blood poisoning? Yeesh. Ugh, no thanks. Number 2, cellulose nitrate. You take some nitric acid, you take some sulfuric acid, you mix it together and run it through some flammable material or a medium such as cotton, and bada bing, bada boom, literally you got yourself some cellulose nitrate. The process was commonly done on clothes back in the late 19th century, which is just an awful idea. Some people might think it's because you're wearing volatile compounds, which is very true. That's very true. But imagine a warehouse full of garments treated with this stuff. Uh-oh, not good. Especially considering how unstable it is. Chemistry fans will agree with me when I say while it's different, it's actually very similar to nitroglycerin, which was used to detonate large rocks and pathways when the railroads were being built across the nations. Canada and the US, of course, I'm talking about. It wasn't good. A lot of people got hurt in that one. Wasn't good. Number 1, the revenge dress. We've talked about a lot of naughty stuff on this list and on this channel, so it's time for some levity. What's the deadliest dress out there? Well, that would have to be Princess Diana's revenge dress. Ooh. Worn by Princess Diana after her husband Prince Charles publicly admitted to an affair. What? Scandalous. Which for royals is a big no-no. You kind of can't really do anything without the media noticing. This dress is also lethal because, well, there's a good chance Diana maybe sort of kind of was done in by the royal family a couple years after she wore the dress. It wasn't too long after that. Plus, if it's called the revenge dress, I mean, come on, she was out for revenge. She was out for the blood. That counts, sure. A little bit of fun. Number 10, the hobble skirt. This is a bad idea written all over it. The hobble skirt, also jokingly called the speed limit skirt, was a dress with a very tight hem, making the poor lass who's wearing its movement, well, not having much of it. Can't have the wife running off from her home now, even if that, you know, that meant the home was not a good place and men acted really bad back then. But no, you can't have her running away. Apparently though, some were so tight that it caused women to fall, and in some extreme cases, I can't believe this, those falls were fatal. What? Number 9. Muslin dresses. Honestly, I can see celebrities doing this today. Okay, so the female figure. It's sleek, it's curvy, it's gorgeous. Today a girl's got some options on how she wants to flaunt what her mama gave her. You go, girls. But back then, well, not so much. Except for the muslin dress, apparently, which I find strange at the time, since seeing a woman's ankle could give a guy a stiff neck for hours, if you catch my drift. Essentially, this was a dress that you had to wet first, like a gentle misting, if you will. Yeah, weird, right? And then you'd wear it out. Now, for the summertime, this makes sense, and honestly, I might support this myself, actually. See the curves, stay cool. However, some stories tell us of women who wore this during cooler weather and then got sick. Fashion over function, ladies. Be careful. That's a silly one. Oh, 40 below, I better wear my muslin dress. Yes, I'm just gonna walk out. Number 8, ladies wear. Okay, this is a general one, but ladies' dresses and wear in general was just ridiculous. I mean those big poofy dresses, it just seems like ladies had it rough. When have they not? Wear a dress that's too tight or so big you struggle to walk around. Not to mention the fanciest of dresses have wire or wood cages and frames. Just making walking around more difficult because, yeah, that makes sense. For me, anytime I wear formal wear, I keep an eye out for bathrooms. You never know when you need to go. However, I just can't imagine trying to squeeze the lemon in those bad boys. Whew, that would be difficult. To make matters worse, there are stories of women wearing just regular big poopy dresses and then getting in accidents at factories. And yes, it was gruesome. And yes, they didn't make it out. And no, there's no movies about it. Stop asking.
Number 7. Fainting room. By today's standards, fainting rooms might seem quite scandalous. And while they were very fashionable back in the day, often being linked to corsets, at least so we think. In reality, fainting rooms actually had less to do with corsets and more to do with people's desires to nap without having to bother with all the business of undressing, getting in bed, getting back up, having the bed remade, and completely redressing. Instead, fainting rooms were a place where you could sneak off to for some peace and quiet during a busy afternoon or major social event, or simply a place you could just go to rest for a bit without having to do the whole sleep time ritual that usually accompanied, going to bed. What's more scandalous is the fact that the women who were known to actually faint back in the day, that is true, and even today women still faint, people still faint, had this malady attached to corsets by physicians. Usually, of course, men back in the day who simply just didn't know what was wrong with these women to make them faint so much. So what did they do? They blamed corsets, of course. Although to be fair, corsets are notoriously bad for your health. But still, I just love that these doctors were like, I don't know what's wrong with this woman. Corsets. They make her faint. That's what it is. Probably iron deficiency, heat, being overdressed in the heat. There's a lot of reasons why people faint. Number 6. Scheele's green. This dye color became super popular in the Victorian era, but is also known for being literally made out of poison. If you're worried that women of the day didn't know that at the time, nah. They were actually informed on this, yet they still chose to wear this color because, it was simply too gorgeous. Hey, it's worth it. A little bit of arsenic poisoning, no problem. It did cause symptoms of arsenic poisoning among those who wore the dresses dyed with this color because it's dye, this fabric is still rubbing up against your skin, still getting absorbed through your pores, but it actually caused even more harm to those who made and dyed the garments with it. Because they're the ones actually breathing that in and stuff. Yikes. Number 5. Bloomers. Bloomers were one of the first styles of pants women gravitated towards in the Victorian era. They were worn in rebellion of the often unruly skirts of the day, which made it hard to move around and, well, honestly probably do anything. Female cyclists instead preferred to wear bloomers, causing much scandal as people felt it was improper for women to dress so masculinely. How dare you. Basically, bloomers are like more floofy pants is how I would describe them, and people felt that pants should be reserved for men to wear. Even the floofy ones. They were like, women can't have any pants, not even floofy pants. I gotta say, I would totally rock some Victorian era bloomers and be causing all the scandals myself if I were around back then. They definitely look more comfy than pretty much almost everything else women were wearing. The bloomers got their name from a prominent American feminist of the time, Amelia Bloomer. The though she herself did not invent them, but she was a person that basically spoke out and was like, why can't women wear pants? Although Amelia Bloomer did fight hard for women's rights, she herself is not someone I believe we should just straight up glorify, to be clear. She also said some pretty terrible things about Native Americans, and she also seemed to be content with civilians taking the law into their own hands and literally hanging people deemed undesirable in their community. So it's a big yikes from me. Number 4, corset. Corsets didn't originate in the Victorian era, but they definitely became iconic in regards to the fashion of that time period. That's because slim waists, they came back into fashion, baby. They also became iconic for the fact that they were causing great damage to the people wearing them. While I too do love to don a corset from time to time, it is important to make sure that you don't push it when you're wearing them, and it's important to remember that this extreme form of shapewear literally has a history of moving people's insides around as a result of wearing them daily or even just regularly. Honestly, even me wearing it every now and then is not good for you. Just corsets aren't good for you. So even just wearing a corset, every now and then, it's not good. Probably shouldn't do it. I probably shouldn't do it, but am I gonna do it? Yeah, probably. And even back in the Victorian era, when they were trending again, we knew that corsets were bad for you. And it made this item quite the risque one, despite it at the time being coveted and widely used by many out there. That was actually even a topic back then. People were like, should people be wearing these? This seems dangerous. Number 3, flashing. Some ankle. Can't see it on camera, I can't show it to you because it'd be too scandalous. So scandalous. As silly as this sounds now, especially with it being summer right now, as I'm talking about this, a time when being underdressed is really just being comfortable. This was, in fact, a huge thing in the Victorian era. Women were often covered head to toe from the top of the neck all the way down to the ankles. It was common for women to even wear multiple long skirts and stockings in an attempt to just fully cover their legs and ankles. So those who decided to flash a little bit of ankle with their fashion choices, woo! They were considered quite risque. Number 2, hoop skirts. As deadly as they were definitely fashionable during part of the Victorian era. The hoop skirt, also known as caged crinoline, was a type of skirt that was built like a cage. There's various different ones which were made out of different materials, but the idea is it's literally a big hoop cage that you wear and then you put a dress over top of that, or a skirt over top of that. The idea was to add volume to the bottom of your outfit, which would also help to make your waist look even slimmer. Something that was very fashionable back in the day and something still coveted by many in regards to modern beauty standards today. Hoop skirts though were deadly because you would often misjudge the size of your skirt, which could cause all kinds of accidents. Also, many of the materials used to build the hoop skirts and dresses that went over top were very flammable. Many people died from catching fire or getting their skirts caught in machinery or even carriage wheels. So yeah, don't wear a hoop skirt if you have to do anything or be near flames. Or just be alive in the Victorian era because there were open flames everywhere. Number 1, the one piece. I like that I saved this one for number 1. I didn't realize I was doing that, but I knew. Subconsciously. The one-piece swimsuit created quite the controversy when it came into fashion near the end of the Victorian era, and the really wild thing is it initially pretty much covered almost like your entire body. But, and it's a big but for this era, it was very fitted. So because it hugged the body, as swimwear really should do so that you can, actually swim, it was considered to be quite scandalous. Not only that, but of course the one piece also wanted to maintain your modesty by not having your skirt float up in the water around you, giving everyone potentially a free show. So it was fashioned to be pants, Oh boy, a woman in pants without a skirt? Scandalous. How dare these women try to swim? Number 10, tulle skirts. Tulle skirts were a major problem. Although these were chiefly worn by ballerinas, ballet has always been a destructive form of dance when it comes to basically how it affects the body. I mean, many ballerinas literally have their toenails fall off as a result of dancing on point. That's just kind of like an assumed part of the profession if you're dancing point. However, we aren't even talking about the feet here. We're actually talking about how safe the costumes are, the literal garments they dance around in, not even their shoes or their feet. The answer to that question They're not very safe. Considering that before electricity many danced on candlelit stages, you'd likely be horrified to hear just how flammable these costumes were. There are many examples throughout history of ballerinas and dancers getting too close to candle flames while in their costumes and basically lighting on fire. And I gotta say, I've listened to multiple podcasts that have talked about this, so I could recommend some to you. If you want some, let me know in the comments, I'll send them your way. Emma Livry is by far one of the most famous ballerinas though to have caught flame. She actually did initially survive the incident, but she died 8 months later as a result of her injuries. It sounds terrible. And there were honestly countless others who suffered similar fates. The really terrible thing is, back in the day, this is something new that I found out, we actually had the means to make fire retardant costumes, but they affected the aesthetic of the costumes, making the costumes appear a little bit more stiff. So rather than try to save the more than thousands of ballerinas who died in even just a single year, we decided to opt for beauty over safety. To me, that's pretty scandalous, I'm gonna be honest. Scandalous and disappointing. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Bumblebee and you love learning history with us, be sure to let us know by clicking that subscribe button. Honestly, we got a lot of fun facts for you and I don't want you to miss out. Number 9. Showing some shoulder. Ooh. The crazy thing is we actually just came from an era before this when showing shoulders was actually considered very fashionable. But by the time the Victorian era really started to kick into gear, this was actually considered completely improper. Paintings even had to be repainted to reflect this new trend because showing a bit of shoulder literally frightened some people. They were like, oh, I can't look at it. Repaint that painting, cover those shoulders up. I'm not joking, that's a real thing. And don't even get me started on cleavage. Shoulders were previously considered to be something beautifully showcased from gowns that had both lower and wider necklines. This was considered beautiful and sexy in a good way. But with puritanical views taking over, anything considered too beautiful, and definitely anything considered sexy, would be seen as bad and sinful. So we had to cover those shoulders up. Man, if I traveled back to the Victorian era right now, they'd be like, girl, what you doing with those shoulders? Sorry. My shoulders and my ankles are out today. Oh, scandalous. Number 8. The gall dress. Well, Marie Antoinette was not around during the Victorian era, living and dying just before it began really. Her presence was felt in regards to the mark that she left on the fashion scene. Marie Antoinette was often seen as a woman of scandal, not just because of the stories of her love affairs and her actually being misquoted here as responding to the poor, starving people of France by saying, let them eat cake, but also because of her fashion sense. While by today's standards, Marie Antoinette would be seen as probably being overdressed among us, by her time standards, she was often seen as presenting herself as immoral, with many of her dresses resembling more undergarments of the day than the usual more modest finery and typical style. Case in point, a portrait that was done in her chemise style dress, known as a gall, by painter Vigée Lebrun, was condemned for how it portrayed the monarch. People actually admired Lebrun's work in terms of the painting itself, but didn't like the dress that she had painted the queen in, as they felt it appeared too intimate and informal. As a result, the painting was actually removed from display, and Vigée was forced to repaint Marie Antoinette's dress into something more formal and fitting, because it's too risque. We were like, we can't look at the queen like this, it looks terrible. Repaint it. I don't know why I'm making everyone British when we're in France, but there you go.
Number 7. Bowler hats. For men's fashion, nothing was more indicative of the time than the bowler hat. While it was originally created in the 1840s, these hats rose to prominence against stiff competition from the top hats, which we all knew were fighting an up hat battle. Fedoras were still, fortunately, a ways away from becoming the saddest thing to grace the human eye, and so the bowler hat found a nice little niche for itself to rule quite comfortably from. A symbol of the city man, the bowler hat became synonymous with both the time period and the working man, and has remained something of a time-stamped staple ever since. Like, come on, you've seen Charlie Chaplin, the dude was born in a bowler hat. Number 6. Makeup trends. At the turn of the century, makeup was just beginning to become a little bit more accepted culturally, which led to a slow increase in its modern application. In particular, paleness had become something of the accepted norm, which women would attempt to achieve through the consumption of lemon juice or, just just the direct application of it to the face, probably in the eyes. The idea of appearing youthful was gaining major traction, and demands were met with an increase in beauty salons, but over-application was still harshly criticized. Number 5. Mourning clothes. In wartime, it was common to suddenly learn of the passing of a family member or relative, and with funds strained, the process of going through the mourning ritual became more streamlined. While general rules did determine the length of mourning depending on the closeness of relations, ranging from several weeks to half a year, the actual rules of propriety regarding clothes worn was quite simple. It's gotta be black. As a result of this, it became commonplace to just simply dye everyday clothes black in place of breaking the bank on new mourning clothes, as it was likely to experience more than 1 or 2 deaths a year. Number 4. The straightening of dresses. As fashion moved onward, the common shape of the dress was actively reconsidered. Orientalism, their words, not mine, became the center of focus for a number of styles. The designer Paul Poiret being credited for its implementation into Western style. While the morality of this remains to be seen, it was generally responsible for moving styles away from the outwardly flowing dresses and drawing them inwards, in direct contrast to the hats. On that topic, turbans were actually also slowly making their way into popularity alongside this, though it should be clear that the majority of these decisions were made purely with the goal of just changing the common aesthetic, with little regard given for the actual cultural significance of the style. Even so, the impact was clear, and what was poofy was on its way to becoming slim. Number 3. Fluorescents. Not so much a trend, just more of an interesting observation. As women's fashion began to grow more masculine, the change in fashion made masculine clothes more desirable as a result. Coinciding with this was the military career of Flora Sands, who served in the Royal Serbian Army during World War I. As women weren't particularly common in the army, she was actually the first one, she struggled to make her way to the front, eager to join the fighting in lieu of working as a nurse. Finally enrolled as a private, she worked her way up in the military, becoming a captain. Now, interestingly enough, while attending a royal event of some sort, a member of the royal family was quoted as observing Sands and stating that she wished she could wear clothes like hers. Number 2. Radium hair tonic. I wish I was joking. One of the downsides of haphazardly clinging to the ideas of progress as an all-encompassing good can be found in the world's slow realization of the precise dangers of radioactive materials. Prior to this, workers were made to handle radioactive materials with their bare hands, most famously the radium clock painters. While not dangerous to the customer, prolonged exposure of the mostly female work staff led to extreme illness and, in most cases, death. But before that horror story came to light, some dude actually tried to sell this as a hair tonic. Seriously, make your hair glow for $5. How many people actually bought this product was unknown, but it is clear that after the effects of the clocks were made public, the product was subtly pulled from shelves. Number 1. The hobble skirt. This is easily the strangest trend of the time, and a result of the aforementioned slimming of dresses. Apparently inspired by a Wright brothers demonstration where a woman was flown as a passenger from their plane, for decency's sake, she tied a rope around her ankles to keep her dress from billowing all over the place. And one designer, Paul Poiret, got an idea. This resulted in a design which would eventually develop into the pencil skirt, but mostly just ended up with women falling off of bridges and drowning. This actually happened to Ida Goyette in 1911, and earlier, a woman who was wearing that skirt was unable to avoid a loose horse on a racetrack, which trampled her to death. One of the lighter jokes that was due to the hobble skirt was that women would apparently compete in hobble skirt-based races, and Paul Poiret would later be quoted shamefully admitting that he had freed the bust and shackled the legs.
And coming in at number 10, stiff collars. This early 1900s invention was accidental by nature, but seems absolutely painful just hearing about it. The detachable collar or stiff collar, created by Hannah Montague in New York in 1827, has been coined the father killer. But why? Well, this stiff detachable collar is so stiff that men could die from just wearing it. Yeah, basically just rubbing your jugular up against it all day would restrict oxygen to the brain. You could pass out or even die. This man was killed by a collar! So basically your own collar is rear naked choking it out of you all day. I thought the tie was the worst part. Made out of usually a separate material to the shirt pinned onto, the removable, starched to absolute hell and back collar basically turns as a sharp and rigid on your neck as a knife. Pain is beauty, darling. Apparently men would fall asleep after a couple of drinks or succumb to a cat nap and sometimes not even wake up at all. Dressed to death. Literally.
Number 9. Mini bowler hats. Ah yes, are you tired of bowler hats fitting on your head properly? Are you stuck in the 1940s and you're now tired of regular sized, properly fitting bowler hats? Well, fear not, old heads. Introducing mini bowler hats. Yep, that right there is fashion right there, folks. Take something that's already working and then just jazz it up, just mess it up just a little bit. This look didn't last too long because only a few could pull it off, obviously. The hat wouldn't fit on your head, that was the whole point. A hat that isn't supposed to fit. It was always sideways and like dainty, it was kind of half off. Any swift breeze comes along, good game, the hat's gone. Now you're chasing a mini bowler hat down the road like it's a silent film.
Whoa, oops, sorry, my hat.
Harper's Bazaar deemed the mini bowler hat one of the worst of the 1940s. Yeah, I see a lot of hats now that aren't on all the way. Drives me nuts. I just wanna put it on. It's always like about to flap off. I'm like, you're gonna lose it, man. The wind's gonna come, you're gonna lose that hat. It's a nice hat.
Number 8. Bad teeth. If you've had a couple root canals like me and enjoy the taste and feel of your tongue ripped to shreds after a big old bag of sours, well, then this one's for you. Opposed to the nice clean white smile we all strive for today, back then the sight of bad teeth was actually, well, charming. It usually meant you had a lot of money. Ah, those disgusting peasants and their hygiene. Teeth have a lifespan on their own, and the white discoloration from poor hygiene happens to all of us on its own. But the best method and the fastest method to ensure that those little chompers become stinky and brown, sugar. Which, if you were living anywhere between the 12th and 19th century, was very expensive and really hard to come by. So why the fashion craze? Well, it's got multiple purposes. For instance, in Southeast Asian cultures, blackening one's teeth, or the Japanese ohaguro, was seen as both a beauty standard and a tooth preserver. This process would happen by coating the teeth in a mixture of goop, usually made out of iron, vinegar, and vegetable tannin to dye the teeth black. Queen Elizabeth is a great example of this beauty standard. She would basically just smash a sugar goop into her mouth every day to purposely destroy her teeth. The more infected and discolored the teeth, the better. Ew.
Number 7. Blackout buttons. When German bombers began to make strikes on British cities, a major problem was coming to be more common. With the increased availability of electricity, it was then easy for bombers to pick electric power plants as targets, and eventually they started hitting their marks. A city under siege and darkness will be prone to mass panic and the fatalities that commonly occur with such things, and so a plan was devised to make for an easier transition. UV absorbing buttons and pins were created and distributed, some materials even making their way into the fabric of clothes as a whole. As a result, accidents were reduced in blackout conditions and the material continued to be produced post-war with hobby figurines. However, more darkly, the material did make it easier to identify bodies in the collapsed rubble of homes. Number 6. Dog wool. After the implementation of clothes rationing, women who were not prepared to face the shortage ended up having to get creative. While the practice had begun in a minor way at the tail end of World War I, in 1941, business was booming in the dog wool industry, and it was soon discovered that some breeds' furs were better for spinning than others. Labradors and Spaniels' fur didn't work so well, and despite their visual similarity to sheep, Poodles' fur was the worst of all. The best breeds ended up being Collies, Sheepdogs, Chows, and Pekingese. Even with that, the trend died the moment clothes rationing ended, likely to the dog's satisfaction. And our noses. Number 5. Viscose rayon. Well documented in the book Fake Silk by Paul David Blanc, when the world went to war, the commodity of viscose rayon saw a massive boom. However, the method of creating the chemical links in order to build viscose rayon was extremely toxic, resulting in an unprecedented loss of life as the effects were felt in the 60s. This was felt in particular on the Axis side of power, with prisoners of war and political prisoners being forced to produce the material at an extremely high rate. The conditions were so bad that reportedly German factories implemented nets around the second floor of the buildings to prevent their workers from taking their own lives. Number 4. Make do and mend. Another excellent wartime piece of propaganda. This piece was yet another effect of wartime clothes rationing, generally focusing on ensuring that civilians made their clothes last as long as possible. Make do and mend was a social movement that hoped to lighten the impact on morale. The general idea started with simply using whatever materials you had to fix any clothes that were damaged, but eventually it spiraled into homemade fashion. Initially, it was simply done by wearing soldiers' clothes while they were away, then turning worn down clothes into new clothes, then making clothes out of food bags or belts from cellophane. Reportedly, few husbands ever noticed. Number 3. She wears the pants. Hard to imagine now, but work with me. Back in the day, women wearing pants was a bit of a faux pas. But as the whole patriotic utilitarian image crept into popularity, most of these social conventions were demolished. Interestingly, post-war there was an immediate push to return to these established norms, which was fought against vehemently. With nearly a decade's worth of time to become entrenched, the social pushback was difficult to justify beyond the general aesthetic means, as men just wanted to see women wearing dresses again. The counterpoint was that it was still a nightmare to get any clothes at all, but it was also pretty fair to state that pants were just fairly comfortable. Just one more of those little pushes in the direction of increased autonomy. Number 2. Uniform hierarchy. An interesting note was in the cultural impact of how men's uniforms were perceived by prospective wives. As it turned out, there was a sort of hierarchy to how men were valued that was separate from their actual rank, and it was entirely determined by the color of their uniform. With the British military, the PBI, which stands for Poor Bloody Infantry, were at the bottom of the barrel, also referred to as the brown jobs. Then there were the naval officers, who were seen as quite fetching with their dark blue uniforms. Further up than those was the Royal Air Force blue. In at number 1, Woodies. When Japan entered the war, their stranglehold on rubber made the material virtually impossible to find. As a result, the supplies required to produce the soles for shoes dwindled, and the search for new material began. According to Harper's Bazaar, the material ended up being wood. Woodies, as they were called, were a strange type of shoes and apparently difficult to wear when compared to most other shoes. So much so that magazines selling them apparently had to publish guides on how to properly walk with them.
Number 10. The corset. As women began to increase their mobility both socially and literally, the only word left for the binding implement was a muttered dye. Seriously, these things sucked to wear. I've actually had the misfortune of wearing something similar back in my theater days, and I really don't recommend it. Interestingly, it wasn't a complete murder of the implement, as designers worked out different types of corsets designed for particular activities, the dance corset being one of them, and another being the maternity corset. I'm probably not the first to say this, but don't wear a corset if you're pregnant. As a result, the total ownership of corsets did increase due to the variety that was suddenly available. Despite this, the tides were clearly shifting against the corset, and it wouldn't be long before the implementation of the garment went the way of the dinosaur. Number 9. Raising the skirt line. If you're Amish, best look away now. Yes, well, the previous decade saw a mass flourish in the extravagance of the dress. The increased mobility thing I mentioned earlier meant that women more than likely found themselves a little sick of tripping over their clothes. As a result, the skirt line began to lift, and the overall ensemble of skirt and underskirt was dropped in favor of just simplification. While normally this would have been met with outrage, the interesting component lies in how these trends were framed. See, these women weren't just being scandalous, they were being patriotic and practical. In wartime, this distinction was wide enough that the usual voices were uncommonly silent. This could also be attributed with the rumblings of the dance craze, the sudden need to go out and move requiring clothes that, didn't eat your feet. Number 8. big ol' hats for the ladies. Where the 1900s saw hats growing upwards, the 1910s saw hats growing outwards. These new hats had unusually wide brims and were designed in a way that allowed them to rest on the skull at a tilt. At the same time, short hair was becoming just as popular thanks to one Irene Castle. And as a result, both trends neatly intersected and ended up accommodating each other quite nicely. Some of these designs ranged from simple and neat to just outright bizarre. It's like there was a competition to stuff the top of the head with as much feathers, bells, and whistles as they could. As a result, these strange hats have become deeply iconic as a part of women's fashion for the time. And while they did eventually get reined back in, there are some absolutely bananas designs that you would even think would make Napoleon blush.
Morning garb, and I don't mean pajamas, is number 7 in our countdown. Known as the monarch of mourning, Queen Victoria influenced how grieving women dressed and behaved in Europe and the United States after the passing of her husband in 1861. She famously mourned him for 40 years until her own demise, and started what's now known as the Victorian mourning etiquette. Victorian mourning etiquette came with elaborate rituals to commemorate their dead. It became normal to have incredibly elaborate and lavish funerals, curtail social behavior, and even erect statues and ornate monuments as tombstones. Mourning clothes were part of this, and they were introduced for both sexes. Said to show a family's outward display of their inner feelings after the passing of a loved one, the rules for who wore what and for how long were complicated and often outlined in popular journals or household manuals. Call that a mourner's magazine. Jokes aside, men definitely had it a lot easier. They simply wore their usual dark suits along with black gloves, hat bands, cravats, or ties. For women, especially should she be a widow, there were different levels of mourning and garb to wear as you progressed out of deep mourning and into lighter mourning and so forth. Deep mourning was of course black, but also made specifically was a crepe styling, a scratchy silk with a puffed, crimped appearance associated with mourning as it doesn't pair with any other clothing. Right. The mourner would eventually stop donning the crepe and then stop donning black. This was called slightening the mourning, before cloth colors eventually moved on to gray, mauve, then white, until the mourning period was considered complete. Number 6 in our countdown is the human hair wearers. Fun because it rhymes, but creepy for a whole slew of reasons. So, what do I mean by human hair wearers? Well, it was a tradition in Victorian era to don jewelry that had segments of human hair embossed, woven, or sealed into it. But for many Victorian people, the amount of hair involved in remembering loved ones went far beyond a little lock in a necklace. In stores and women's magazines, you could find patterns for wreaths made of hair and wire, often floral designs. Bracelets, brooches, earrings, and necklaces were also all very common. In its prime, human hair jewelry and decor was considered incredibly fashionable. It's even said that swapping locks of hair was a love token between women-loving women or friends, the way that girls today might wear friendship bracelets with each other. I guess if you need a trim and you were already late on a birthday gift, you could really just kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Number 5 in the countdown is all about buggy dresses. The wealthy Victorians were very into the grandeur, looking to feed a fascination with culture especially. Beetle wing embroidery was at a peak of fame in the 18th century India, and was quickly appropriated by English visitors while military occupied the country from 1858 to 1947. Elytra, which is the hard casing over a beetle's wing, first appeared on dresses and experienced their first burst of popularity in England by the 1820s, though English women in India had likely been donning it since at least the 1780s. Material used was often white or other pale colors to help augment the reflective green tones of the beetle wing. This visual was made possible when elytra was paired with zardozi, a gold embroidery style often done on colored cottons or silks. Victorians at least didn't appropriate everything about the art form. They made patterns and styles of their own for the dresses. Elytra was sewn onto the gowns in an imitation of live beetle patterns, a reflection of Victorian interest in naturalism and zoology. Not sure why anyone wants to look like they have live bugs crawling on them, but okay. Number 4 is the casual ball gown. One of the most notable shifts in Victorian time was that fashion began to be differentiated by gender rather than class. This reflected the changing roles of women in society. And let me say, every part of Victorian women's fashion seems tortuous. You start your day layering on long, crotchless underwear and tunics before strapping a metal cage to your waist. You then wear an average of 6 skirts over that, alongside bodices and corsets that would forever change the placement of your organs seconds and potentially even suffocate you to death. The reported average weight of a Victorian dress when fully on could be anywhere between 14 and 22 pounds. But the risk doesn't end there. In fact, it was everywhere. It was estimated that between the 1850s and 1860s, 3,000 women in England died from their crinolines catching fire, as airy fabrics and hoop-supported skirts also allowed for plenty of air to circulate beneath a dress, which could also make a small flame grow out of control in seconds. In 1864, the New York Times reported that 40,000 women worldwide perished from dress-related fires. Another common occurrence was to see them pulled into machinery after walking too close and having some of the skirts catch in exposed parts. Yikes. It's no wonder that the large ball gown crinolines phased out in the late 1800s, but then bustles came in and they were worse in different ways. While more practical as it was slim on the sides and the front, it required women to sacrifice movement and comfort in order to achieve a fashionable shape like the corset did. They began to alter women's spines, ribs, and organs over time, as they required women to twist their bodies completely in order to be able to sit down. Overall, while movies and TV may make these beautiful gowns seem whimsical and ethereal, they truly were just death traps. Number 3 in the countdown is bird-brained. I enjoy my puns, but there's a reason for that one. This trend was started by the notorious Marie Antoinette, a rebel in the French courts for her outlandish fashion and accessories. Amongst her pile of powdered curls, Marie was often seen with feathered caps and bonnets. While this look became an envy for women across America and Europe, the trend did struggle to take off initially, as much of the aristocracy was perturbed by it. However, a trend is a trend, and eventually the English society was persuaded. They donned mainly ostrich, pheasant, or peacock feathers at first. Eventually entire songbirds were stuffed after their death and adorned these hats. By the late 1800s, the plume trade had decimated several species of birds, including flamingos, birds of paradise, and rosy spoonbirds. Topping the endangered list were the snowy and great egrets, as at one point their pure white feathers were worth more than gold. Promoters of the feather trade knew what they were doing and also knew that the public didn't understand the carnage that their fashion was sieging on these animals. They held that wearing feathers and whole birds brought city dwellers closer to nature, that it improved people's awareness and knowledge of bird species. Thankfully, it's due to the inevitable public awareness and then disapproval that bird hat sales diminished and went out of trend altogether. Number 2 slot in the countdown is Paris green. It seemed Parisian aristocracy had a chokehold on the globe with their trends. It's believed Empress Eugenie was to have worn a dress so stunning at the Paris Opera one evening in 1864 that it was featured in newspapers globally the next day. It was a deep yet vibrant green, one rumored to almost glow in darkness. The green of Paris quickly became the hue of the social elite. So, how was Paris green made, and why was it so dangerous? The color was discovered when chemists combined copper and arsenic poison. The result was a dye brighter than all the other greens available on the market. Copper wasn't what gave this color its iconic nickname, however. Arsenic is a highly hazardous substance that causes skin sores, vomiting, diarrhea, and in some circumstances cancers or death, as we know now. But they didn't. When factory workers' arms and hands began to wilt away from sores and decay that could only be connected to the dye, French and German governments enacted legislation prohibiting the production of arsenic-based pigments. It's the right thing to do. Meanwhile, the British government mainly ignored them, even when Matilda Schrewer famously died of arsenic poisoning with the whites of her eyes stained green from her working in factories. This was deemed accidental poisoning by the government at the time. Paris green remained popular in England until, ironically, it just went out of trend. It's a little bit of an abrupt ending, honestly. No justice for those exposed in workplaces or compensation for suffering, but nothing takes the cake quite like the Victorian trend of looking dead, which is number 1 in our countdown. You'd figure people look dead enough as is, inhaling arsenic and mercury from their clothes and shoes and hats constantly, let alone their home decor, but looking dead was the fashion of the day. This look was specifically modeled after how tuberculosis affected you. Pale skin, watery eyes, red lips. While this disease was decimating the lower status, higher status women recreated it with makeup and arsenic consumption. You heard me right. In order to get pale skin, women consumed arsenic. In order to not die from arsenic, the consumer had to follow a careful process, eating small doses to build up a tolerance. Now, arsenic is addictive, so if they at any point stopped the consumption, they would experience withdrawals such as vomiting, stomach pains, convulsions, hair loss, nervous system failure, kidney failure, delusions. The list goes on. Some women were stuck taking it for the rest of their lives. For the desired watery eye look, women would put citrus or even perfume perfume in their eyes. Some went farther, using belladonna flower, also known as deadly nightshade, for longer lasting tears. However, being poisonous, little wonder why blindness was widely reported as a symptom of belladonna drops. No wonder it did such a good job. Red lip paint included? You guessed it, more poison. In this case, usually lead. All of these poisonous products would contribute to illnesses and facial decay. Death was of course a long-term side effect of the usage once poisoning reached its crescendo. Suffice to say, while you may really want to fit in, some trends are not worth getting on board for, especially if they'll slowly melt your face off.
And number 10. Leather jackets. I just had to say that cool, I felt like I needed to. Okay, so how did we get from prehistoric leather to grease lightning? This warm, durable piece of clothing has been popular for many eras, but now, where did it all start? Well, firstly on the animal. The leather jacket we're used to seeing is based off the World War I jackets. That's right, German pilots wore these brown, thick leather jackets in their planes before the cooler, sleeker bomber jacket was born. From the early 1900s, we see the leather jacket really start to take off with more military use in World War II, now worn by all sides. Irvin Schott's initial design was created in 1928 and widely used by military motorcycle personnel. He named the first one the Perfecto, after his favorite cigar company. It wasn't until the 1950s and 60s where we see this garment take on a sense of actual fashion, with studs like McQueen and Brando repping the look in Hollywood movies, and well, there it took off. Punks in the 70s and 80s, women, men, these are all everywhere now. Of course, the faux leather has also made its way into life now with the abuse and cruelty of animals. I'm all here for it, not judging. It comes in literally every size and color, and you can literally buy a leather jacket anywhere you go.
Number 9. Lash lure. Turning the calendars back to 1933, the year FM radios and drive-in movie theaters changed the world as we know it. Right on. I love both of those things. Still, so much, for sure. See, not all inventions in 1933 were family friendly. Some of them were quite deadly. Like the one-of-a-kind mascara, Lash Lure. Here we go, to lure you right in, easy peasy. This 1930s cosmetic contained a chemical called p-phenylethylamine. I can't even say it, that's how you know it's bad, right? This mascara left blisters all over your face. It wasn't working, the chemicals didn't react properly for some cases, and it was horrible. Now, eventually, in 1933, there was sadly a death. One woman sadly developed an infection, a bacterial infection, and ultimately passed away because of said mascara. That same year, the before and after photos were used in an FDA display titled The Chamber of Horrors. Yeah, it was a horrible incident, but it got the attention from higher-ups. Lash Lure was the first product in history that was ever removed from stores. There's a little dark fun fact for you. I guess the display at the old Chamber of Horrors did the trick. Lord, we're in the middle of something similar now though, aren't we? Cigarette packages have those horrible side effects to smoking images right there on the package, you know? The chick on the cover looks like a demigorgon from Stranger Things. You're like, ugh, I'm all set. I'm just gonna fidget spin this. That's horrible.
Number 8. Sunglasses. This bright invention was first created in the 12th century China. This rough, heavy slab of carved quartz was first used in an attempt to block the sun's powerful rays while being able to protect the face and eyes. These glasses didn't have ear rods and were just held up against the face. The Inuit of North Canada have something like this as well, made out of bone or a piece of wood, carved with slits cut out of it for the eyes to see into the bright snow. The smoky glass texture of the quartz allowed the person to see through the glasses and have the rays refracted through the dark color. See, I said refracted, lots of scientific words, you know what I mean? Basically, they were just experimenting with different smoky rocks and gems in front of their face until James Aschkow started making way with tinted lenses in the 18th century. The rich were wearing more and more shades until about 1939 when Ray-Ban made the aviator polarized lenses and the shades were forever changed. First pair sold for $5. 40 days to carve and polish for $5, huh? It's not a bad deal.
Number 7. Propeller hats. Okay, I'm coming for hats in this video, it seems. Sorry about that. Propeller hats in Super Mario, very practical. A lot of Goombas, sudden gusts of wind, plus a few warp pipes. You're gonna need a lift or two, right? Fair. The summer of 1947, not that windy folks. Not windy enough for propeller hats, I'll tell you that for free. Why are teens in the 40s wearing airport runway anemometers on their heads? Why? We don't need to know the wind velocity outside, just go eat some ice cream. Well, it started with a cartoonist named Ray Faraday Nelson. See, he used this propeller hat in a cartoon, and then later on at a sci-fi convention, he had the cartoon there with a real-life propeller hat. And everyone was like, what, how? How did he just do that? This of course swept the nation just like the fidget spinner. Brands made their own versions, they hopped on the trend quickly. So quick in fact that Nelson never had time to even secure a patent for this new fresh idea. yeah, it was too late. He didn't get a dime from the hats, and we didn't get the gift of solo flight. So let's call it even, Ray.
Number 6. Ruffs. With silken coats and caps and golden rings, with ruffs and cuffs and farthingales and things. Taming of the Shrew, Act 4, Scene 3. Ah yes, the theater and the ruff. Well, not that rough, but quite literally theater in a ruff. A ruff, I sound like a dog. A ruff, or also known as the Elizabethan collar, was an interchangeable piece of cloth that could itself be laundered separately while keeping the wearer's gown from not being soiled at the neckline. Long story short, no Chef Boyardee spilling out of your mouth and down onto your clothes. Hey, that's a good idea. The stiffness of the garment forced upright posture and poise. Most ruffs could only be worn once due to its longevity and structure. Made out of a very fine material like silk, their light and delicate material, design, and size led them to become a symbol of wealth and status amongst the upper class. There was even a time where blue dyed ruffs were against the law in England, since it resembled Scotland's colours on its flag. It shall only be of 2 primary colours, yellow and blood. Or red. Red.
Number 5. Smoke break jackets. Here we go. Hey, remember Hugh Hefner? Yeah, not only did he treat women like but he also dressed like it completely. Yeah, rather fitting if you ask me. Guy would wear a stinky maroon colored jacket and then sit there and blow smoke in your face all night. What an icon. Guy changed history. He would wear what's called a smoking jacket. That's what this garbage is. They were around in the 1600s, but they really peaked popularity in the 1920s, when Hugh was like 56 years old, you know what I mean? These jackets were designed for gentlemen, I mean obviously, you know, they were designed as bathrobes with class. They were made of this velvet cloth, perfect for soaking up cigar smoke and further accusations. God rest his soul. He really left his mark in history, didn't he?
Number 4. Corsets. Okay, we know literally everything about these things, but you don't, so listen up. If you have to put your foot in the middle of my back to lace me up, yeah, it's too tight. Or is it? A stiff and rigid piece of clothing that I could definitely use for my posture. The corset, first invented in Italy, then France, then England, the rigid posture and protective garment around the kidneys, ribs, and vital organs under a knight's armor were adopted for style, class, and shape. Most popularized during the 16th century, this slim and sleek look was adored and worn by all classes. The best way for a woman to shape her bust, a man's chest straight and high while riding, and a great way to lose consciousness. No, I can breathe. Go a bit tighter. Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, thank you. Usually made out of something strong like whalebone or wood. The stitched corsets would maintain its hard shape and the wearer would basically just be stitched in for the entirety of the day. That sounds comfortable.
Number 3, hammer pants. Okay, look, Kyle and I were on a dance team or two growing up. We get it. Baggy pants, extra zippers that don't even have pockets that are far too shallow to hold even that of a chapstick. We get it, okay? We love a good pair of dance pants. The hammer pants from the 90s, I don't think that was it. We should have heeded MC Hammer's warning and not touched it. You know what I mean? The man turned 60 this year, so we have to now look back on the truth. From him, MC Hammer himself has made it very clear. He says, quote, "Don't call them parachute pants. I detest the term." End quote. Yeah, man of few words, but you know what? When you sing that many songs, you don't need to speak anymore. Obviously, MC Hammer didn't invent this style, but it's funny to see him act like he did. You know what I mean? These types of trousers initially appeared in Persia, India, and Turkey thousands of years ago, but we love your bangers, MC Hammer. All 3.
Number 2, belladonna drops. Growing up with bad vision, I've had some pretty weird things shoved into my eyes. Dirty fingers, drops, but never a scoop of berry jam. Nah, I kinda missed out on that one, I guess. Okay, maybe not jam, but the belladonna berries, though very toxic, had an unusual role in beauty standards in medieval Europe. Upon squishing this doughy-eyed remedy into your sockets, the person's, usually women's eyes, would dilate, resulting in huge, doughy puppy dog eyes, just running around town with blurred vision like you're about to get ophthalmologisted. EML49 strawberry, raspberry, blueberry, that's not, okay, what? Of course, you wouldn't be able to see how good you looked per se, as if you've ever been dilated for optometrist reasons, then you know exactly what I mean. The belladonna or beautiful woman drops got you running into walls every 2 seconds, but boy oh boy does she look beautiful.
Number 1, paper dresses. This short-lived fad was introduced in the 1960s. It was a good one. It was exactly what you think. Paper dresses, nice. Paper Mario in real life, finally. I've always wanted this. I could already feel the paper cuts What a nightmare this ought to be. Here we go. Paper dresses to go. That was the phrase they like to use. They said the word go twice, therefore must be a good product. The Scott Paper Company made these not expecting the reaction that it got. It caught on quickly, of course. It only took 6 months for this casual paper company to start selling more than 500,000 paper dresses. Just out of nowhere, they're like, let's just try this, and then it worked. It went so well that other companies hopped on board, just like the propeller hats. Over $3 million were spent on this awful fad. Andy Warhol was even in on the mix. It was a big deal. Everybody wanted to be involved. They weren't made of flimsy printer paper. It wasn't as bad as I'm making it sound, but it certainly wasn't great either. The dress was made of disposable material called Duraweave, before it was cool to make things out of disposable materials. Believe it or not, it was slightly water and slightly fire resistant. Unlike those puffy middle-aged dresses that immediately go whoom and then they don't exist anymore. This one was a little bit better. Took the flame a little bit of time, right? It's been compared to the thick paper bib that you get at the dentist. Yeah, that horrible material that bunches up and pokes your neck mid-root canal while Kyle's doing stuff? It's made of that. Fun. We love history. We love beautiful fashion history.
Alright, number 10. Clothes rations. As the war raged on, there was an immense amount of pressure placed on clothes manufacturers. Uniforms had to be made and maintained, and the increase in air combat required a surplus of parachutes, while the variety of environments required different materials for survivability's sake. As a result, in 1941, the British government introduced clothes rationing, where a number of coupons would be allocated each year. Different types of clothes would be worth different amounts of coupons, with 66 coupons given for every adult at the beginning of the rationing. As the war continued, this allocation began to shrink, and in 1945, the regular amount of coupons given per person was 24. Despite the war's end the following year, rationing continued until 1949 as the economy recovered, but had laid the foundations for a different type of fashion, generally in the style of informality. Number 9. Patriotic knitting. One of the more fascinating results of the wartime strain on clothes was the way in which it changed hobbies into forms of support. In the end, as husbands went off to war and wives asked how to help, the answer was given that they ought to knit. Evidence for this can be found in some fascinating wartime propaganda, which honestly deserves its own list, but my absolute favorite might be the poster asking if you remember Pearl Harbor and answering itself with Pearl Harder. Despite the cute ways in which the activity was promoted, knitting did end up having an effect, as even prior to Pearl Harbor, Americans were knitting sweaters and mittens to be sent off to the Eastern Front. Arguably, the fad peaked when Eleanor Roosevelt was photographed knitting for the war effort. As a result of this, some women had reportedly begun friendly competitions based on quantity of clothes knit, with one Scottish woman even hitting around 1,000 pairs of mittens by 1941. Number 8. Fashion is out of fashion. Other ways in which propaganda was set in favor of rationing was through the manipulation of what is considered fashionable. The effects of this will soon be seen, but one of the oldest publications in the history of fashion coined a phrase that caught on like wildfire. Fashion is out of fashion. While this leads more into the ways in which propaganda can allow for significant social changes, and it's also something that no one, not even you, are immune to, it's interesting to point out how wrong this was. Rosie the Riveter, for instance, was a remarkable piece of propaganda that's synonymous with the entirety of the Second World War, and yet she's presented in a way that is still somewhat fashionable. Thin eyebrows, applied makeup, and styled hair. All of these are things that you wouldn't have seen in a wartime factory, but it worked as intended and allowed for an increase in patriotic fervor far from the front.
Number 7. Big foreheads. Here we go. This one's for the ladies. Nice. Hit that thumbs up for this big old forehead, this bright forehead. You can see the lights off. If I stand here, that's the forehead light right here. Elizabethan foreheads. Yes, here's one I can finally lean into. My family called me a 5-head growing up. Little did they know I would have cleaned up shop back in the 1600s. Here we go. Plucking your hairline was a sign of beauty back in the day. How amazing is that? I mean, it still is today, but it's different, right? We're kind of pulling back. We're like, you know what? No, I don't want to pluck anything anymore. It hurts. I'm done. More often than not, women in the Renaissance era wore restrictive upper body clothing. The ideal look back then was flat-chested and hair plucked back, like you're a goddamn chicken. I can't even pluck this unibrow thing that I have going on here. I just shave it. I give up. Plucking hurts. I'm just gonna shave this one spot for the rest of my life. So mad respect to the pluckers out there. Pain is beauty, I guess. Ice Road pluckers.
Number 6. Cowboy hats. Well, howdy, partner. Made most popular by horse riders, farmers, and your buddy named Dougie, the cowboy hat or cavalry hat has been around for quite a long time. First started with the Mongolian riders and then taken on new shapes and forms throughout history as the wide-brimmed hat. The cowboy hat is back and popularized in southern states around the early 1800s. Made out of literally any material from straw to felt, this large crown, large brimmed hat kept the sun out of your face and off your body. Hey, sun safety. It resembles the sombrero from the early Mexican use and influence. These things have been around for centuries and are still thriving. I mean, just go to any Kenny Chesney concert, you'll find about 100 on the ground after the concert. Just pick one up, put it on your head, free. Some have strings, some have feathers. The cowboy hat has made its place in fashion and practically yeehaw forever. That's a terrible joke.
Number 5. Bliats. Heading back to the 12th century for this gem. European men and women both rock this look, okay? Of course. Sleeves that droop down all the way to the floor. Who wouldn't want a piece of that action? Walking around all slow like this for no reason? We've seen Lord of the Rings. Imagine walking around in a castle with one of these, playfully just dragging behind you as you emerge from the cellar on a full moon night. Oh, my majesty. I'm gonna faint thinking about it. That's easy. Man, we need Bliats back today. I wish I had a couple Bliats for prom. I wouldn't have even had to ask her to dance. I would just stick my Bliats out and then a queen would accompany me. Just like that, voila. The roots for this dazzling look go back to the French Germanic origins. The word translates to our modern day use of blouse because it was the same light, ghosty material. Yeah, imagine attending a meeting in a Bliat blouse made of silk. Immediate write-up, so fast.
Number 4. The bikini. I don't know why, but for some reason in every picture as a kid I'm running around in a sexy black Speedo. You know the deal. No shorts, just thong on cheeks. I was always embarrassed by the lack of clothing and felt vulnerable, but learned growing up that that's fashion, baby. Sometimes you feel a little uncomfortable. The bikini, a controversial and even at many times illegal piece of clothing, is a piece of fashion that has been around as early as 5600 BC, and the history of the bikini can be traced back to that era. Carvings and paintings of women wearing bikini-like garments during the competitive athletic events in Rome have been found in several locations. Most of the time worn by women, the bikini went through a ton of design. Two-piece bathing suits have been seen all over the world, so what's the problem? Well, it's illegal in certain places and illegal now, still. Inappropriate use of showing off one's body could be a crime around the early 1900s. Police would just walk around the beach and measure the length of a two-piece bathing suit. You have the right to remain silent, anything you do or say. The 30s and the 40s, it's still pretty exotic and people were kind of shady about the idea of revealing so much skin. The 40s and the 50s comes around, starts to become a little bit more Hollywoodized, and then the 60s and 70s, it's on every magazine in America. The two-piece bikini is worn today and is a symbol of confidence and sexuality. How much do you think they go for?
Number 3, moon boots. Unless you're Link from the past and or future, you're not pulling off a pair of moon boots, okay? Sorry to burst your bubble. Back in the late 60s, these hot and heavy pieces of footwear were the hottest trend in town for some reason. Yeah, winter boots all year round. We love it. Fashion. But yeah, welcome to Canada. Also, we wear these 11 months out of the year. It sucks. My ankles are always hurting. Moon boots originally appeared in 1969 in Italy, and it was part of a ski wear collection, but add a little Apollo 11 moon landing into the mix, now we have a fashion trend in history. Now we all think we're astronauts and we're dragging our feet to the club in the middle of July. Once space became old news, so did the Apollo boots, sadly. We've seen these bad boys appear in modern history. Chanel, Jeremy Scott, big names are still trying to bring back the moon boots. Let's bring back the moon shoes. How about that? How about a functioning pair of those? Remember the commercial? Kid jumps, grabs an apple, lands. Just false advertising at its best.
Number 2, high heels. The high-heeled shoe or high heels, or simply known as "where's my heels?" have been a piece of fashion since the early 10th century. The design raises the heel of the wearer's foot significantly higher off the ground than the wearer's toes, causing the wearer's legs to appear longer, make the wearer appear taller, and accentuate muscle tones in the wearer's legs. It's all about the calves nowadays, man, all about the calves. Typically seen as a men's garment until the mid-1500s, the high heel is a staple in today's fashion, as its design and functionality hasn't changed in almost 1,000 years. King Louis XIV of France made heels a standard and would have himself hundreds of pairs of gemstones, lavishly precious metal-lined high heels, basically just one of the Kardashians' closets. But as we all know, pain is beauty, and these nasty things really f*** up your feet feet. Due to the structure of the high heel, this piece of fashion could be the most harmful to our bodies. Just shoving your size 8s in a sexy size 5 crumpled up like Play-Doh all night? Yeah, that's definitely gonna do it.
And finally, number 1, painted veins. Hey, from one pale human being to another, I have no idea where this came from. I don't get it. I don't see it at all, really. Back in the 1800s, you only had 2 looks to choose from, really. There was painted or natural. See, natural was light on the makeup, as you'd guess by its name, but painted, well, they meant that in a literal sense. This more vibrant look required actual paint, just lead-based paint. And the most important part of applying all this is you can't move or smile. Yeah, any emotion will cause the paint to crack. That's why all these paintings are so serious. 4 more hours? 4 hours? Okay. Madame X, the portrait, the famous portrait, originally painted back in 1884. At first, her straps were slipping off her shoulder, right? A little, right? But that was deemed too scandalous for the upper class society around the painting at that time, so John had to repaint the straps back on. What a joke! He's like, okay, too sexy? Okay, straps are on, there we go, we're fixed. Backlash was still so strong after John had sold the painting because her skin was so pale and you could see her veins. It was like, oh, too much, I can see through you, what the hell? Just no winning back in the 1800s, eh? Can't have spaghetti straps, can't have veins. Wait till Playboy comes out, you guys are gonna shit.
Number 10, corsets. Hey, what's more lethal than being constricted by a garment that it really is unnecessary unless you really need some support for the chest? I'm sure most ladies are familiar with what a corset is, simply because I too would be afraid of them. They're not fun. Nobody likes being squeezed or chokeslammed like one of the Undertaker's victims. Oof, no thanks, that guy's scary. The corset was a garment that went under the dress to help squish together everything, tummy, chest, all into the desired look. Trouble is, well, they're tight, they're not comfy, and well, they can actually cause a lot of health issues, especially in warmer climates. Breathing becomes an issue and women have been known to faint. While not a dress itself, yes, I know, but for hundreds of years it did go with every dress, so I say that counts because you couldn't wear a dress without one. Number 9, Muslin disease. This one is just crazy, man. Okay, let's take a look back at the 18th and 19th century France, where there was a law against the peasant class wearing more than 4 kilograms in weight of clothing. Ooh, what? Thus preventing the lower class from owning higher quality fabrics that were strictly reserved for the rich and wealthy. Ooh, that's scandalous. So, a lot of times women would disregard their undergarments, which that is crazy enough alone. However, what's really crazy is that they would wear muslin dresses, which were often dampened with water before going out to have a light, breezy, and cool outfit to wear in the summer. Plus, it was kind of see-through, so you could kind of see all the curves in all the right places. The trouble is, sometimes these light fabrics were wetted down and worn in less than prime weather conditions, and some people, well, they got really sick. It was actually suspected to be the reason for the 1803 influenza outbreak in Paris. Was it? Maybe. Did it contribute? Probably, but not the main reason. Still though, that's crazy. Number 8, the hobble skirt. I'm not gonna come out here and pretend that I know a whole lot about fashion, cause, folks, I don't. Heck, if it's plaid, simple, or, well, if it smells clean, I'm probably just gonna wear it. I like my clothes to feel free so I can have movement, so I can do all the crazy antics I do here on this channel. I hate being confined, and I imagine a lot of women feel this way too, so I can just imagine how much fun wearing the hobble skirt is. Not a lot of fun. A long skirt that has a more narrow bottom specifically designed to enable the user's movement because, well, you know, God forbid a woman wants to keep a brisk pace in the summer or something. The crazy part is there's stories of women falling and tripping and getting hurt from the hobble skirts, and in extreme cases, even fatal, which maybe we should stop wearing them. We kind of have. Which to me, that just says it all. Rose in 1997's Titanic is actually wearing one where she trips and stumbles. Oh, see, look at that. Made a movie connection there too. Oh, there you go. Look at that.
Number 7, cloaks. These mobile sleeping bags have been worn as far back as ancient Greece and ancient Mesopotamia. Made out of anything from fur to wool, these usually neck to foot length portable blankets were seen as both practical and decorative, one of the most used and reused clothing technologies. I can understand why such a simple piece of material can be used for so many different things. Protect you from most elements, camouflage you when hiding, and you could pretty much make these yourselves. Some people added hoods and pockets to theirs. Harry Potter gets it, Batman gets it. These people got it. Cloaks, capes, magicians' uniforms, we still use these things to this day. We gotta bring these back with youngins. Just Dracula cape someone on an exit? I mean, that's like the new mic drop. Yeah, I'll see you this weekend. Number 6. Togas. Much like the cloak, a very simple and ageless garment. a loose-fitting sheet typically wrapped and folded across a person's body, seen as far back and popularized by ancient Romans. These common eggshell white dresses were used as general garb by both men and women of all classes. Think about how much red wine they would spill on these. Apparently they were big drinkers back then. Sorry, do you have any club soda? Yeah, just don't dab it, please, just blot it, thank you. And these things were huge too. You almost always needed help wrapping yourself up like a burrito. Hurry up. Usually young boys would wear purple until they were a man. If you were mourning, then you would wear dark colors, and if you were in state, you would have the typical white toga, possibly with some colorful embroidery for some class. Pretty easy, you have like 3 choices. No more throwing clothes on and on before school. No, not that, I wore that last week. Can I see the white again? This garment was eventually abandoned by women, and then the lower class, and then the upper class, and then eventually men just really wore them at frat parties. Toga! Toga! Yo, Raven Romulus, bro, they're nuts, man. Number 5. Krakows. A popular shoe first originating in what is now Poland, the Krakow gets its name from exactly this place. Krakow, or also known as Pulain shoes, were worn from roughly the 13th century to the 17th century by men and women of all classes. Multi-sizable, the long pointed shoe would have been sewn to a point and just rounded at the tip. The first use, of course, was merely decorative, stuffed at the toes with usually moss or hay. As time went on, the fashion trend took off and more people were just designing long, stinky socks. Just 1420 muddy England with no arch support, slipping and sliding all over the streets. How bad did they smell too? No socks, just foot on shoe rubbing? And you know they weren't clipping those toenails. I bet they were just curled up underneath them. Ew. I guess these would have been good for all shoe sizes. Kind of like a one shoe fits all your whole life kind of deal. Typically made out of wool or leather, these could be also crafted into metal and fitted for a knight. Like swords aren't scary enough, now I gotta dodge your pointy knife boot attack? Aha! Number 4. Powdered wigs. The powdered wig, or periwig, most famously coined after Louis XIV, started this up and coming trend. As far back as the 1600s, we've seen these paintings of men and women with huge white hairdos. You're thinking, that's a lot of hairspray and a lot of stress. Well, actually it wasn't even their hair. In fact, most men and women were balding underneath during these times. Yeah. Syphilis, good one. Syphilis was the most popular of STDs, and one of the common side effects was patchy balding hair, also blisters, and also sores. With the plague constantly knocking on the door, cleanliness and class was upheld in values more than anything. The powder, consisting mostly of starch and lavender, was used to powder wigs and rid them of odors, stains, and even bugs? Dude, I'm getting itchy reading this. That's right, a ton of bugs. Usually in the form of lice would be attracted to these wigs, and most of the time were infested even before their first wear. Worn by all classes, the powdered wig is an icon in fashion. It's used through so many centuries by so many different people. Just coughing non-stop while shaving your head so you don't get fleas. Shaking the ants out of your head before the big dance. The common price for a decent wig would cost about a week's worth of wages. Of course, the upper class spending much higher price for larger and better quality pieces, coining the term bigwigs. The rich and their bad hair pieces. Like it's jet black, you're 89 dude, let it go! Number 3. Chainmail. Worn from 3rd century BC to about 16th century AD, historians point us in the direction of Celtics in Europe for the initial use and design of this shiny metal shirt. From the word burnie, the chainmail is one of the most widely known lightweight mobile armors people could really wear for one's safety. One of the most useful and practical sets of wardrobe designed for mostly military personnel, the chainmail, or commonly known as mail, was a lattice grid consisting of tightly fitted metal loops to form an almost knitted poncho. Hood, sleeve, you name it, they made it. This item of clothing would be custom fitted to your body and worn all day. I bet you'd be pretty tired because most of the time, a full jumper of mail was about 50 pounds. In the rain and the mud. That's heavy. And in the rain too? Like, did they ever get electrocuted? You're basically a giant metal golf club on top of a castle fighting with sharper metal golf clubs. Zeus just chucking thunderbolts down at you and you're just trying to keep your head up. Number 2. Cod pieces. Jock, Dance belt, the old stuff the sock trick. These guys did it first. And I say guys because, guys, men definitely created this. Yeah, I'll take the bigger size. The big one. Hurry up, please. Hurry up! Size mattered back then, and size of one's cod mattered. A piece of fashion designed for both safety and for boasting. Getting dressed was hard back then, and you didn't want to get your bits all caught up in any material. So the answer was the 15th century codpiece, made out of metal, wood, or leather. The codpiece was fitted around a man's stuff and securely tied to his waist belt or pantaloons, either under or over his clothes. Some believe this was designed due to the waistlines rising and the shortening of one's jacket over the years, revealing more and more of the goods. Sometimes to show off, sometimes for battle, and much like the modern jock, it did serve numerous protection reasons, but was mostly seen at the time as a fashion statement. Again, size and reputation mattered, and flaunting was all part of the 15th, 16th century culture. Louis XIV knows what's up. And step will change, sire. And number 1. Macaroni. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. Yeah, that's a real song, dude. I thought my neighbor Declan made that up playing road hockey when I was 8. Near the end of the 18th century, at one of Europe's most heightened times, also known as the Age of Enlightenment, was an eclectic group of people called the Macaronis. No, not the delicious noodle, but instead a group of young men flamboyantly pushing the boundaries of fashion to even trolling it. Huh. These men were mocking a style, and in that, created another style. Yeah, that's pretty gangster, dude. Basically, you would wear the biggest wig you had, and on top, a tiny miniature hat and a feather. Just a cute little guy. Someone was definitely trying to make their friend laugh, and then it just worked. This high slang term for high fashion is thought to have originated from the elegantly dressed Italian immigrants, elegantly noted Italian men boasting about how perfect their macaroni pasta was and throwing about the term for everything they liked or adored as macaroni. Wow, I love your shoes, they're so macaroni. Yeah, your hair's like so macaroni. It's like really macaroni, you know what I mean? The sillier and more elegant and more vibrant, the better. Men would have to walk around with ceiling-high wigs, the balance alone. Oh, okay, there we go. It was a time to show off. And the coolest part? Macaroni style was genderless. Men and women could borrow and mix match styles at this point in history, and people were digging it. It was like the 80s of the century. Well, I guess that's literally the 80s at some point. Vibrant colors, glitz and glamour, you name it, they wore it. And that's why I feel the Macaronis deserve the #1 spot here. Just the name alone, man, come on.
Getting us started at number 10 is top hats. A top hat is an iconic image. You can see them in old black and white movies or on logos such as Mr. Peanut. But why were top hats created, and why were they so trendy? Well, there's multiple reasons actually. Men and women were already wearing hats and bonnets to protect their heads from rain, wind, and the soot from local smokestacks. As a result, hats were already quite a trendy wear. However, the true reason for its popularity is what it represented. The top hat quickly became symbolic of status, power, and masculinity. From 1850 to 1900, men wore top hats for business, pleasure, and formal occasions. Certain colors were even associated with certain times of day. For example, a black top hat was for day or night, making its wearer feel taller, more handsome, even suave. Some were even reported to be a height of 12 to 14 inches tall. Top hats, amongst other hats of this era, also required ridiculous upkeep, such as being brushed, boiled regularly, powdered, etc. They also tend to contain mercury poison. As time progressed, we found other ways to overcompensate as well as accessorize our heads, so it's easier to see why the top hat never made a comeback. Number 9 in the countdown is women and their flirty fans. When you see a gentleman caller across the room, you may want to send him a hint that you're picking up the vibe that his top hat is putting out. What better way than subliminal messaging with an item you're already carrying? In Victorian times, women carried fans due to fainting spells, which were really just the result of their excessively tight and heavy garments, something we'll cover later in the video. In 1827, a fan maker from Paris, Dovelroy, published a leaflet explaining the language behind the uses of a fan. Some examples were twirling the fan in the right hand meant that I love another. Meanwhile, drawing the fan across the cheek told someone special that I love you. A fan half opened and pressed to the lips gave permission for a kiss. However, it is rumored that the less romantic truth is that the fan etiquette, such as as Duvalroy's leaflet, was invented in order to boost the sales of fans in the 19th century after they had fallen out of fashion following the French Revolution. Irregardless of rumors, it appears in olden times some people were using fans to get hot rather than cool down. Speaking of keeping it cool, next in our countdown at number 8 is bottomless underwear. While showing a bit of ankle may have made you a harlot, in the Victorian era every woman was walking around with crotchless undergarments. But these strange underoos were invented with a justified purpose. Due to the amount of fabric layers, steel crinolines, and tight bodices and dresses, women of the era didn't really have time to spend an hour undressing before nature calls. By creating undergarments that had holes aligned with the wearer's groin, a woman's only mission would be to hoist up as many layers as she could before popping a squat. Don't be fooled, however, that wasn't exactly easy either. Some of you may wonder what happened if Aunt Flo paid a visit while a woman was wearing an open bottom undergarment. Well, in Victorian times, menstruation hygiene was perceived very different, and women quite literally let it flow. If you want to learn more, search that one up on your own. As fashion evolved and women wore fewer and lighter clothes in the early 20th century, pulling down undergarments from underneath bustles and cages was no longer a nightmare, so the crotchless undergarment was soon abandoned once more. But now it does make sense why everyone loved the high-kicking can-can dancers in 19th century Paris.
Number 7. Crinolines. Also known as hoop skirts, here we go. These ones here presented the opposite problem as the hobble skirt. Now you're the size of a minivan. There you go, good luck. The hoop skirt emerged as a prominent fashion trend in the mid-19th century. These structured undergarments, typically made of, check this out, steel or whalebone, or both, one of the either, RIP ankles. These steel frames would be covered in fabric and then worn underneath women's dresses to create this large, attention-grabbing, bell-shaped silhouette. You look like a boss from the game Cuphead. A really hard boss. So many layers you gotta through. These skirts would enhance the desired hourglass figure, right? You'd look great, you'd have that whole thing going. However, their size and heavy frame posed challenges in movement, led to occasional accidents, of course. You're trying to dance with young Shelly here, and her steel dress nicks you, gives you tetanus. Now you gotta go home and figure that out. Good luck. Everybody loses. This one sucked. Number 6, bombast. Mr. Bombastic, what is he doing right now, you know? This one here is my least favorite. This one makes me so itchy to talk about. I was typing this and scratching all my To bombast oneself. Sounds like you've died and then something happens. What did that mean back in the 16th century? Well, this flamboyant style, popular among the upper class, of course, involved an extreme amount of padding inserted into clothing to create exaggerated proportions. You look like a big Shrek guy. This style was heavy in the sleeves of both men and women's garments alike, and it was intricate layers of fabric that were supported by stuffing made of horsehair, wool, and sawdust. Horrible things you want to put on your persons. They would stuff their clothes with sawdust and wool. It's like they want lice. It's like they're inviting lice in and bugs just to come and live with them. God, I feel so sick. I gotta move on. Number 5, corsets. I'm gonna hold my breath for this entire one. Originating in the Renaissance period, corsets were structured undergarments designed to shape and support one's upper figure. Hopefully, for a bit, they would enhance your natural curves. Now, as centuries passed, corsets evolved in style and construction. Add a couple more laces, squeeze a little tighter, see what happens. However, their restrictive nature and health concerns eventually led to a shift in fashion ideals. Thank God. Yeah, people back then were passing out. They were experiencing internal organ problems. Your body can't be bunched up like that for years at a time. Your organs are not a fan of that. Waistline looks great, but your spine is misaligned, so... Number 4, bustles. This one here is my absolute favorite. I feel like we're slowly coming back to the bustle trend, just in a different way, with different materials, if you catch my drift. During the Victorian era, the bustle emerged as a prominent, I didn't want to say a fashion trend, it was more of like a chore that you had to continuously keep up. At first we had it tight, and then we just let it all go right in the back, right there in the I'm on board with this one, I'm not gonna lie. Bustles were introduced in the late 19th century, and a bustle was a padded or structured undergarment worn at the back of a woman's skirt. Just there, not up here, no big giant arms, just all in the ass, that's it. Its purpose was to create a protrusion and enhance the appearance of a fuller, more rounded, thick with 2 Ks posterior, right? And it worked. Look at these. Bustles varied in size and shape, ranging from modest padding to Victorian Kardashian levels. Really, it's all up to you. Get creative. Everybody's so creative, right? Number 3, bloomer suit. In the 1850s, a new and, dare I say, controversial garment known as the bloomer suit. Nope, the bloomer suit. The bloomer, these are all fucking tongue twisters, man. In the 1850s, a new and, dare I say, controversial garment known as the bloomer suit, I can't say this, I'm gonna have troubles with this, the bloomer suit. This new suit emerged as a symbol of women's liberation and reform, and it looked pretty sick. It looked very cozy compared to everything else on this list. It was named after Amelia Bloomer herself, a prominent advocate for women's rights, and the bloomer suit consisted of loose trousers gathered at the ankles, and it was worn under a knee-length skirt. I want to wear this to work tomorrow, some smooth criminal vibes coming in. The bloomer suit was designed for practicality and freedom of movement, which is nice with, again, what I just listed. It challenged the restrictive fashion norms at the time. This changed the game. These suits were associated with progressive ideals promoting women's rights, gender equality, and the rejection of traditional feminine attire like whalebone suits and to make you pass out. While the bloomer suit eventually fell out of fashion, its legacy as a symbol of women's empowerment, of course, continues. I want to wear one of these. I'm just gonna wear a suit under this hoodie, see what happens. Number 2, the Bliot. I've been playing lots of Elden Ring, so I'm a big fan of this one here. This one's good. Ooh, my god, look at those elbows right there. That's so magical. The Bliot was a hot garment back in the 12th and 13th centuries. They held cultural significance in medieval Europe. Again, a lot of wizard vibes coming from this one. It was a loose-fitting dress, typically made of luxurious fabrics and adorned with intricate embroidery, and it was worn by both men, women, and wizards. Yeah, all three, you name it. The Bliot accentuated the natural curves of the body and symbolized wealth. But most importantly, it featured long, trailing wizard sleeves, often exaggerated in length and width going to the floor, again, real wizard-like. And ideally, these sleeves would add an element of grace and elegance. You'd have to walk around with your elbows up like this. It'd be pretty exhausting, if I'm being honest. As fashion evolved, the Bliot gradually gave way to more fitted and structured garments. You know what? I'm gonna bring it back. I'm gonna show up to work tomorrow wearing one of these. You gotta walk so slow if you wear one. I'm gonna be so late, so holy-like. And finally, number 1. Paris green. Not to be confused with Paris Hilton, a vibrant green pigment, yeah, we're gonna end on one of these, gained popularity during the Victorian era despite its hidden dangers. Paris green was composed of copper acetoarsenite, and it was extensively used as a colorant in wallpapers, fabrics, and cosmetics. This was everywhere. Saved it for last because it was literally all over the place. It was horrible. Very dangerous. Its toxic nature posed serious health risks. Long-term exposure to Paris green caused symptoms ranging from skin irritation to, I don't know, organ failure. So somewhere along those lines, you'll end up. Good luck. It earned the sinister nickname Invisible Killer. So yeah, you know when you're painting, we actually used it for this green screen right here. Paris green right there. It's believed that countless individuals suffered unknowingly from the effects of this pigment. Eventually, the awareness of its toxicity led to its decline in usage, and now it serves as a cautionary tale of the hazards hidden beneath the allure of fashion and design in the Victorian era. Back then, everything was so bad for you, and they're like, yeah, let's put it on our eyes and see what happens. Why not? Fashion.
Number 10, chopins. These ancient slippers-ish shoes were used for more than just throwing at the heads of your unruly teenagers. Imagine catching a hardwood 14-inch Chopin across your butt thrown at you like a 90-mile fastball. Solid wood too. Just a huge block, just originally worn and seen on the women in the 15th and 16th and 17th century Italy and France. These huge platform heels were designed for sliding over your shoes and socks to keep them dry and clean from the mud and the muck. Rule of thumb was, higher the Chopin, higher the class. Most of the time, these platform shoes are so high that you would need an assistant just to help you get around. Yeah. No, I don't. I want to go this way, please. Thank you. Walking all over the place like Gene Simmons, 14 feet high. Great way to roll your ankle. Sometimes embroidered or lined with gems and jewels, these shoes were purely decorative and pretty impractical, as you can see. No one's walking up a spiral staircase in those things. No thanks. Number 9, head cones. Egyptologists have decoded the 14th century BCE paintings about these mysterious caps worn on the heads of certain women in ancient Egypt. First assumed it was of religious or ceremonial wear and tear, researchers and archaeologists think that they've cracked the code finally. It's actually a big wad of sticky beeswax. Yeah, but it smells nice. A perfume. This ball of specific gunk sat under the cap, sitting on the crown of the head that under the sun over the course of the day would cleanse the body with pleasant smells. Mostly stuffed with either beeswax or animal fat and then packed with your favorite pleasant smelling herbs and flowers. The cap would then slowly melt on top of your head and would just drip down into the hair and down the body all day, slowly releasing a cologne shampoo hybrid sort of thing. Some were even stuffed with essential oils for the skin. And it wasn't just putting in fennel on your head at the end of the day, huh? That's nice. As of now, researchers have only been able to find women wearing these deodorant hats and paintings and carvings, and have yet to find a man wearing these ancient eau de toilettes. Ah yes, the scent of a man. Ladies, look over here. And now here. I smell disgusting. Number 8. Chatelaines. These practical and very decorative accessories have been used since the 18th and 19th centuries. A deadly yet decorative fashion ending in the Victorian era. Typically a chain made of metal, usually silver, bronze, or brass, and hung from the waistband, riddled with tools and trinkets, attached to it for your everyday use. Cobblers would have cobbler stuff, dentists would have dentist stuff. Basically this was just a cool belt chain on your jeans. Like a giant multi-tool on a keychain. Everything from vials with smelling salts, whistles, to even knives and protective devices. Just a giant set of janitor keys with different tools on it. I feel like this definitely gave way to the Swiss Army knife. Flathead or Robinson. Oh, I got a Phillips if you need. A Phillips? Yeah, go ahead. It was mobile, decorative, and personal. I'm surprised we don't have these right now. I mean, I would use it. Mine would have like 11 chapsticks on it, just all in a row, you know?
Number 7. Pestilence fabrics. Last time I was talking about the Victorian era, I mentioned a few points on fabrics with harmful and dangerous chemicals, which happened more than it should have. It shouldn't happen at all, really. It's kind of sad. Well, that wasn't the only fabric-related issue that was out to get you back then. For example, wealthy people couldn't be bothered to do their own laundry. I hate doing laundry, I don't blame you. I'm not wealthy though. And sometimes would have them washed and taken away by launders who, well, wash clothes of the rest of the city. Being that clothes and washers themselves were poor, or that clothes were just mixed around regardless, that was an issue. There was a lot of sickness going around at the time and, well, it was contagious. A lot of times these sicknesses would cling to fabrics, and when given back to their customers, well, they could very well come down whatever London was feeling at the time. It doesn't sound like a lot of fun. I think I'll just wear more of my dirty stuff. I'll just wear my underwear for 6 months straight. It was white when I bought it, not anymore, but it's okay. Number 6, lead. Here we go again. Lead, just lead in general. It was used in so much stuff. Seriously, it's scary. Especially because they knew it was harmful. It wasn't a secret, they knew. I was gonna pick one leaded item, but I couldn't. I mean, seriously, I know this is a list about fashion, but it was involved in some clothes making processes, it was in women's makeup, which that's also fashion, and it was in house paint, which I know that's not technically fashion, but it kinda is. Trust me, I used to mix paint before I was an internet comedian. I know the history of paint. Ask me your paint related questions in the comments below. I'm the guy you need to talk to. I mean, it was used in pipes too, and we drank out of those. It's just crazy. Now, it is one of those things that minor exposure to is fine, sure, but the thing was with fashion and beauty is that you probably would use said product every day, like the clothing or the makeup, and especially the makeup of the ladies. Lead poisoning symptoms include headaches, stomach pain, constipation, infertility, and memory loss. Yikes, that's not fun. We don't like that here. Number 5, corsets. Nobody wants a waist bigger than 9 inches, said everybody in Victorian times. I for one can appreciate the female form and the hourglass figure. It's admirable, sure, but that being said, I don't think we need to go so far to keep the female form in shape. The corset's a little too much. Corsets were those chest-tightening, gut-sunking, push-all to mincemeat to the top of the pie apparel that went under every woman's dress or every fat dude in his 50s who wants to feel 29 again. I don't think I have to tell you why this is bad or uncomfortable. The human chest needs to breathe, and when something's that tight around you, well, you struggle to breathe. Trouble breathing, fainting were not all too rare, especially in hot and humid climates. For my generation, you may recall Elizabeth Swann had issue with hers in Pirates of the Caribbean. And then she fell, and then Jack Sparrow caught her, and it was a good movie. But the corsets, I can't get behind them. Number 4, foot binding. While not exclusively done in the Victorian era, it was started in ancient times and continued all the way up until the 20th century, thus includes the Victorian era. A Chinese fashion tradition that takes women's feet and binds them and squeezes them until they begin to change shape. Poor ladies. Again, I don't think I need to tell you that forcibly changing bone and muscle structure in your feet just for fashion is a bad idea. I think you all know that. For starters, it doesn't look right. After years of binding, the shape of the foot drastically changes. Secondly, the health risk of doing such is not worth it. Oftentimes toenails fall off or become infected. Ugh, gross. Bones break and pierce skin. It's a bad time all around. Thank God we stopped doing that, right? Jeez. Oh, thanks. Number 3. Lard wigs. Wigs have been around for a long time. If you're a fancy politician from Washington, you wear a powdered wig, singing Yankee Doodle Dandy all the way to the Capitol building. Balding men, women, or really anyone can wear a wig. It's really for everyone. What I'm getting at is it's been around for a long time and we've come a long way. Given enough time and asked to tell the difference, I probably couldn't. I really couldn't point out a wig if you showed me. So we're getting really good at it these days. That being said, in the Victorian times, wigs were quite common and were fashioned with a peculiar substance. Lard, yes. Imagine every day of the week without proper baths or showers and living in close proximity to the Thames River. And you take a handful of pig lard and just slather that in your wig to style it. Put a gross sound effect in there, just gross sound, ugh. Do you imagine the smell? This is the most offensive hair crime since frosted tips in the early 2000s. Those were a big mistake too, I gotta say. I had them, but there's only one man who can pull that off. And he's in Flavortown, you know what I'm talking about. Number 2, German helmets. 1914 was the end of the Victorian era and the beginning of the modern era. It's actually a very fascinating time. It's kind of like modern meeting the past. Really cool. Well, fashion just doesn't mean civilian. Anyone who's ever spent time in the Marine Corps knows that they gotta look their best. Wow, Marines. The Empire of Germany was no different in 1914, and a lot of German soldiers wore helmets with an ornamental spike, like a Koopa from Super Mario. I know you guys have seen the movies, you've seen them. Except the main issue here wasn't an overweight Italian plumbers jumping on their heads, but the war and the enemy itself. World War I was fought in a lot of trenches, so it's kind of awkward when you can see a bunch of little spikes moving up and around the enemy's trench. It's also kind of dangerous to have an extra piece on your helmet, as you can get caught in weird places like barbed wire, and yes, if you're wondering, sometimes they were used in the absence of a good melee tool. Yeah, you'd be correct, sometimes they did. You gotta do what you gotta do. Oh, brutal. Number 1, French uniforms. More World War I, but it's still Victorian. It counts, I promise. While the spiked helmets were a very bad idea, they were shortly phased out. They learned their lesson. However, the French stood up and said, no, I have a worse idea. Also, shout out to France. You guys get a bad rap for the war, but it's really your war. You guys rocked it, man. You guys are the best. Love France. Anyway, the French uniforms were a little bit of a mistake. In a classic case of fashion over function, kind of the theme of this list, they wore very bright and blue-red uniforms. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but bright blue doesn't exactly blend into an environment, thus it made French soldiers a very easy target. Everything's like gray, black, and brown, and you're just wearing bright blue and red pants? Yeah, you're not gonna make it far, Chief.